Hello everyone and welcome to the March Model Aquatic Health Code Network webinar titled Understanding and Applying Lifeguard Bather Supervision in Operational Entries in the Model Aquatic Health Code with featured speaker Joe Stefanyack, who's the director with Jeff Ellis Associates. Before we begin, there are just a few logistics to go over. Please use your computer speakers for the audio portion of this webinar. There is no call-in number for this session. Due to the number of attendees on the webinar, please submit any questions and comments via the chat box on the right-hand side of your screen. The Q&A portion of today's webinar will take place after our featured webinar, but please feel free to submit any questions or comments throughout the duration of the webinar. And finally, this webinar is being recorded and will be distributed to all participants afterwards. It can also be viewed on the NACCHO Model Aquatic Health Code Network webpage. So just to get us started, I'm going to provide a couple of updates on behalf of NACCHO. This is Jennifer Lee, Senior Director for Environmental Health and Disability. Just wanted to make sure that the next webinar is on your radar. It will be scheduled for sometime in May of 2017. These webinars are held on a bi-monthly basis. The other opportunity to take a dive into the Model Aquatic Health Code will be at the 2017 NEHA Annual Conference. It'll be a learning lab where it'll be a chance for you to engage with peers and colleagues that are working in this industry and be able to learn some best practices and tips and strategies. It'll also be in a facilitated discussion format on various aspects of the Model Aquatic Health Code. And just a reminder, we do have our Model Aquatic Health Code Network webpage, and we've included the link there. You'll be able to find all the previous archived webinars and the MAHC resources. And if you haven't joined the MAHC network already, please send us an email at mahcnet@nacho.org. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Doug Sackett with CMAC.
Okay. Thanks, Jen. Couple CMAC updates, and do you have the slides there? Yep, there we go. Next slide, please. Few points I wanted to, few items I wanted to point out from an update standpoint. The next slide, Jen. Okay, we had 180 change requests that were submitted for the upcoming Vote on the Code conference and opportunity to modify the Model Aquatic Health Code. Those are available for review on the CMAC website, and I've got the link there. You go to the home page, and you'll see where can I, up and upper right, you click, and those are accessible there. Now, the Technical Review Committee, their review process is underway. The committee's had the orientation meeting, and they're starting to gather their information together and assignments within the committee. So keep your ears open and look for updates from emails on when the committee work will be available for participating in conference calls to listen in on their deliberations. One important note is there's member comment period. At this point, it's for influencing the Technical Review Committee, their reviews and recommendations by not just I agree or I disagree, but when you look at a CR, is there additional information, either pro or con supporting information that you could provide that will help and assist the TRC on reviewing that? And in order to submit a comment, first you have to be a CMAC member, but then you access the comment form by clicking on an individual CR, and at the bottom of the CR you'll see the submit a comment form. Click on there and you submit comments. We've got probably over 80 comments submitted to date. And the last update is the Vote on the Code conference, which is going to be in October in Denver. We have CMAC registration will be on the CMAC website, and that'll be opening April 3rd. You'll be able to access the registration page and sign up. And the next slide is just if you need to contact me, have any questions, here's my contact information. And the final slide is some contact information or for accessing the MAC or the CMAC websites and additional information. So that's on the final slide. And Jen, that's all I have for the CMAC update.
Okay, great. Thanks, Doug. So I'll now introduce our featured presentation from Joe Stefanyack. Joe has been in the theme park, water park industry for over 30 years. Joe works closely with over 600 municipalities, corporate and private water parks, and water resorts throughout the U.S. and in various countries abroad in the evaluation and implementation of standard operating procedures. Joe has led or assisted with conducting and administering countless international lifeguard training program courses and instructor courses. He has contributed to textbooks published by Jeff Ellis Associates and has provided articles for a variety of industry publications. He's also active in various state and regional committees and is a participating member of ASTM and the CMAHC Technical Review Committee, and has done numerous presentations on the Model Aquatic Health Code, industry trends, aquatic safety, lifeguarding issues, leadership, and a variety of other topics. Joe was recognized as the 2014 World Water Park Association's Kelly Ogle Memorial Safety Award recipient, which is awarded to an individual or organization for significant contributions to guest and employee safety in the water attractions industry. So, Joe, I'll turn it over to you.
Well, hello, everyone, and thanks for the introduction. That's quite lengthy. Anyways, as Jen mentioned, my name's Joe Stefanyack, and I will be presenting the webinar this morning. Today we'll be discussing the Model Aquatic Health Code, and more specifically, understanding and applying some of the lifeguard, bather supervision, and operational entries contained in the MAHC to what all of you do on a regular basis. A little bit about my background. I have over 25 years experience as an operator in the amusement and water park industry, and another 7+ as an aquatic safety and risk management consultant. Throughout my operating career, I have had the good fortune here in Pittsburgh to work with some very bright and talented individuals from both my county health department and the Pennsylvania Department of Health. Individuals whose singular goal was to work not as an adversary, but rather as a partner with me and my staff in the interest of providing the safest environment possible for the guests who visited my facilities. It was this partnership that allowed us to be successful and develop a strong working relationship, mutually respectful and mutually appreciative of the other's efforts. It is my hope that at the end of this session, you will all have a better understanding of some of the entries written into the Model Aquatic Health Code, why they were written in the manner in which they were, and a better feel for how to apply these entries when you visit the many aquatic facilities that you will this upcoming swim season, so that you too can foster the type of relationships that I had and ultimately enhance the overall safety of the facilities that you visit. As a participant on the original Model Aquatic Health Code technical committees for operator training and lifeguard bather supervision, and as a current member of the CMAHC Technical Review Committee, I have had and currently have the opportunity to be intimately involved in the crafting of the code language and have been privy to the many conversations that surrounded the creation of each entry. So it is with this insight that I hope to provide some clarity to the intent behind the discussion points today, to provide some interpretation of the language itself, and to emphasize the need for some critical thinking on behalf of the enforcement officers who are tasked with providing for the safety and well-being of the public as they visit the thousands of aquatic facilities around the country. Of course, we all know that currently in the United States, all pool codes are created, reviewed, and approved by state and/or local public health officials. There are no uniform national standards for design, construction, operation, or maintenance. Thus, code requirements for preventing and responding to injuries and illnesses vary significantly from one jurisdiction to the other, and many of the code enhancements today are outdated due to the regulatory processes involved with amending them. The Model Aquatic Health Code, or the MAHC, is intended to transform the typical health department pool program into a data-driven, knowledge-based risk reduction effort to prevent disease and injury and to promote healthy recreational water experiences. The MAHC hopes to ensure industry standards and best practices are available to state and local agencies for inclusion in their codes. The MAHC also seeks to provide uniform guidelines for design, construction, operation, and maintenance in an effort to provide guidance for state and local agencies to use when developing or revising the existing codes in their jurisdiction. There is no federal regulatory authority associated with the MAHC, so the need to begin enforcement is not immediate, since all regulation is done based on state and/or local codes. But the hope really is that the state and local authorities having jurisdiction, or AHJs as we refer to them moving forward, will adopt a majority of the code. I know several states are currently looking at their existing code entries, and as they update them, they are comparing them directly to the MAHC to see which is most appropriate for adoption. And a few of the states are even looking to adopt the MAHC almost in its entirety. I know I saw my friend Eugene on the call, and they're pretty far down that road. So the process for adoption has begun. And for sure, you can bet that the attorneys will be using the MAHC at every opportunity. We're already beginning to see the code introduced into litigation. So with this as a precursor, the need for education and dialogue regarding the MAHC exists in order to facilitate the smooth transition of practices that will be necessary as the MAHC gains momentum and begins to be adopted at the state and/or local level. Now is the time to start, and you, as the AHJ representatives, bear some of the burden for initiating and directing that dialogue. So with that said, let's jump right into the webinar and begin with our learning objectives for today's session. By the end of this webinar, you should each be able to identify and locate the MAHC entries related to the specific training and operational topics discussed during this session, to understand the differences between objective-based entries and prescriptive entries and the whys behind them, to implement the concepts discussed into mutually beneficial inspection practices, and to create stronger partnerships with the owners and operators for the benefit of public health. The number and types of swimming pools across the country are many, and out of necessity, so are the number of code entries in the MAHC. To discuss more than only a small number of those entries would require significantly more time than we are allotted today, and for that reason, our discussions during this webinar will focus primarily on only a few entries from Chapter 6 relating to training, staffing, and staff management. The majority of these are found in sections 6.2 and 6.3, and we will discuss each in more detail moving forward. Let's begin by taking a closer look at section 6.3, entitled Facility Staffing. Subsections 6.3.1 and 6.3.2 are pretty straightforward, and we will not spend much time on these sections other than to give you a brief overview. 6.3.1 covers qualified operator requirements and availability for both on-site personnel and contracted off-site persons who may serve to fulfill this requirement. A qualified operator, as you may or may not know, is defined as an individual responsible for the operation and maintenance of the water and air quality systems and the associated infrastructure of the aquatic facility. It is someone who has successfully completed an AHJ-recognized operator training offered by an AHJ-recognized training agency and is someone who holds a current certificate for such training. There is not much need for interpretation with regard to this entry, other than determining what training programs and/or training agencies are recognized by your particular AHJ. If your jurisdiction does not have such a list, Section 6.1 details the requirements for operator training courses and the certifications that go along with them. So determining what programs satisfy the standard should not be difficult. It may be necessary at some point for you or someone within your organization to develop this list of approved courses prior to the inspection season, so it is clear what the expectation is. During inspection, it should then be easy to confirm the presence of such certificates and whether or not the facility is in compliance with the code. 6.3.2 is titled Aquatic Facilities Requiring Qualified Lifeguards and provides detailed lists of what aquatic facilities or aquatic venues require qualified lifeguards and at what times during operation. The determining factors here incorporate physical dimensions, user intent, and programming aspects that dictate the need regarding the aquatic venues or facilities, and it may not be readily apparent whether a facility is required to provide lifeguards without an understanding of these criteria. During inspections or prior to, it may be necessary for some dialogue to take place between the inspector and the owners or operators of the facility regarding who the intended users of the facility are at any given time, what types of programming take place at the facility or in a particular venue, and the times at which specific programming takes place. as some of the requirements for lifeguarding may change from time to time based on these factors. In other words, an aquatic facility may only be required to provide lifeguards at certain times while not at others, based on the criteria outlined in this section. It will also be necessary to observe and understand the physical properties of the facility when conducting the inspection. The size of the pool, the depth, and the aquatic features present will also be determining factors as to whether or not the aquatic facility or venue is required to provide a lifeguard or lifeguards. The details for lifeguarding requirements are provided in subsection 6321. The following shall require lifeguards on deck for class surveillance sufficient to meet the requirements of MAHC 6331 at all times during operation. Any new construction occurring from the date of acceptance of this code and any aquatic venue deeper than 5 feet or 1.5 meters at any point. Any aquatic venue that allows for unsupervised children under the age of 14. Any aquatic venue while it is being used for the recreation of youth groups, including but not limited to child care usage or school groups. Any aquatic venue while it is being used for group training, including but not limited to competitive swimming and or sports, lifeguard training, exercise programs, and swimming lessons. Any aquatic venue with a configuration in which any point of the aquatic venue surface exceeds 30 feet or 9.1 meters from the nearest deck. Any aquatic venue with an induced current or wave action, including but not limited to wave pools and lazy rivers, water slide landing pools, and any aquatic venue in which bathers enter the water from any height above the deck, including but not limited to diving boards, drop slides, starting platforms, and or climbing walls. This is much different than some of the old square footage methods or bather load methods that have long been the staple for determining lifeguard staffing requirements. So some education, interpretation, and communication is needed to ensure everyone is on the same page throughout the inspection process. As we move forward in the code to subsection 6.3.3, we come to the safety plan. By definition, the safety plan is a written document that has procedures, requirements, and or standards related to safety, which the aquatic facility must follow. These plans include training, emergency response, and operational procedures. The safety plan is intended to centrally locate several other code requirements into one complete, singular document that is available for review by the AHJ inspector, and it is quite an extensive document. The safety plan requires all aquatic facilities to create and maintain a staffing plan, an emergency action plan, a biohazard action plan, a pre-service training plan, and an in-service training plan. Let's take a closer look at each of the components in more detail, as each component has a variety of layers. The first component of the safety plan is found in 6.3.3.1, which is titled Code Compliance Staff Plan. The first requirement of the staff plan is to designate persons as members of the safety team, or by definition, the employees of the aquatic facility whose job responsibilities are related to the aquatic facility's emergency action plan and overall operating plan. As such, it is necessary that the aquatic facility designate a person or persons to fulfill the following responsibilities as outlined in the code. 1. Identifying and communicating health and safety hazards. 2. Mitigating health and safety hazards and or closing the facility as needed. 3. Interfacing with the AHJ as related to the requirements of the code. 4. Maintaining water quality and, if required, air quality. 5. Enforcing the aquatic facility rules and regulations. 6. Responding to reported emergencies. 7. Supervising the safety team. 8. Conducting pre-service evaluations. And 9. Conducting in-service training. For some of these line items, such as interfacing with the AHJ, there will most likely be one point of contact or a particular individual who is responsible for this task. This individual should be clearly identified in the staff plan and should be the point of contact that the inspector seeks when contacting or visiting the facility. Any comments, questions, or concerns should go through this individual or their appointed designees should they not be available for whatever reason. Some of the line items, however, may have more than one person responsible for the given task. For example, enforcing the aquatic facility rules and regulations, which could be an entire team of frontline staff, supervisors, public safety officers, or any employee really. So it is important that the facility identifies who is responsible for what, and that, as the inspector, you are also aware of who is tasked with fulfilling the roles and responsibilities of each duty so that you can best evaluate compliance. The second requirement of the staff plan is found in 63311, Zone of Patron Surveillance. This section of the code relates directly to establishing and communicating zone of patron surveillance responsibilities for lifeguards when qualified lifeguards are used. The line item requirements are intended to accomplish several specific goals with regard to zones of patron surveillance. Clearly establishing what each zone is, as the staff must know exactly what area each lifeguard station is responsible for. Clearly identifying where the guard is to be positioned. The staff must know where exactly they are to be positioned, including defining the walking path for roving positions. Validation. Each zone needs to be validated to make sure that lifeguards' scanning and response criteria can actually be met. Ensuring total zone coverage for a particular aquatic venue means that the sum of the parts must equal the whole. And finally, providing a clear means by which to communicate zone responsibilities to the qualified lifeguards employed at the facility. This ensures that the staff understands all of this information. In order to achieve this communication of responsibility, the staff plan must involve a written document to include a graphic representation of each zone of patron surveillance for each aquatic venue, such that the qualified lifeguard is capable of viewing the entire area of the assigned zone of patron surveillance without the use of ancillary devices such as mirrors. This is often overlooked or not done properly, and is what we refer to as validation. It is a critical part of the process, as this ensures that lifeguards are actually capable of doing what the owners and operators are asking them to do. If this process does not take place correctly, there is a distinct possibility that blind spots due to occlusion, glare, reflection, refraction, or any numbers of factors will prohibit the guards from being able to provide 100% surveillance of their assigned zone. Zones must be validated so that there are no inhibitors to surveillance. We should also make sure that the qualified lifeguard is able to reach the furthest extent of the assigned zone of patron surveillance within 20 seconds. This must be confirmed against the slowest member of the team to ensure completeness. It identifies whether the qualified lifeguard is in an elevated stand, walking, in the water, and/or at any other approved position. This determination is also a part of the validation process. And finally, the zone of patron surveillance document identifies any additional responsibilities for each zone that is necessary to maintain the ability to scan the zone as required. Furthermore, the sum of the individual zone of patron surveillance documents must ensure that all areas of each aquatic venue are assigned to a zone of patron surveillance. If different staffing levels are employed at different times during operating hours, then separate zone documents must be developed to account for all combinations of staffing levels for all venues. In other words, if the pool operates at times with 2 lifeguards, while at others it requires 4, then there should be a set of individual zone of patron surveillance documents representing the zones at the 2-guard level, and a separate set representing the zones at the 4-guard level. This is essential in order to eliminate any confusion the lifeguards may have related to what exactly they are responsible for at any given time on stand. These documents must be readily available to the lifeguards at all times and should be included in their pre-service training, which we will discuss in more detail further along in the webinar. During inspection, it will be important for the inspector to identify the staffing level at the time and compare the actual position, behavior, and boundaries for each lifeguard on duty to the documented staffing plan in order to assure the facility has adequate swimmer protection responsibilities assigned to the lifeguard team, and that the lifeguards have a good understanding of the assignments. Further, it is important to confirm that the entire venue is afforded zone coverage. The new requirements are objective-driven, meaning not based on the old square footage requirements or bather count ratios that didn't account for occlusions, glare, or any other hindrance to the lifeguard's ability to actually see the entire zone they were assigned. As such, it may be a bit more complicated to determine appropriate staffing levels. However, if done correctly, the new staffing requirements will prove to be a much better method for assigning swimmer surveillance. An open dialogue between the operator and the inspector will help to ensure that there is understanding on both sides of the fence. Once zone of patron surveillance has been established, the staff plan's next piece requires operators to develop rotation procedures, as outlined in subsection 63312. The rotation procedures must ensure that all zones of patron surveillance responsibility at the aquatic facility are included in the plan, that rotations provide for an alternation of tasks such that no qualified lifeguard conducts patron surveillance activities for more than 60 continuous minutes, and that adequate zone of patron surveillance is maintained during the change of the qualified lifeguards. It is probably obvious to most of us that there is a need to move lifeguards around in order to keep them alert and vigilant throughout the shift. Research conducted by Jerrison and Pickett and N.H. Mackworth, as referenced in the Code Annex, clearly illustrate this fact, and also clearly illustrate that a simple 5 to 10 minute break is sufficient to reset the vigilance level to its original point. What may not be as obvious to us is the need to do different things periodically in order to achieve that same reset of one's vigilance. This is what is referred to as alternation of tasks, and the why behind its inclusion in the code. Alternation of tasks asks owners and operators to assign lifeguards other tasks that do not involve scanning or patron surveillance at least every hour for a period of not less than 10 minutes. These tasks could include jobs such as water slide dispatch, cleaning restrooms, working the concession stand, cleaning the pool deck, or any other task at the facility that gives the lifeguard a chance to not have to scan the water in order to reset their vigilance. This could also include giving them a break where they have no responsibilities at all. For facilities that use only a single qualified lifeguard to provide swimmer surveillance, the same rotation strategies must be applied. Therefore, the rotation plan needs to address procedures for keeping patrons out of the water while letting lifeguards have a break or perform other alternation of task activities. Other aquatic facility staff may need to be at poolside to ensure that patrons stay out of the water unless all patrons leave the aquatic venue and it is appropriately secured against entry. The off-duty qualified lifeguard should not be responsible for this activity as it does not meet the intent, which is removing patron surveillance responsibilities in order to accomplish a reset of the vigilance level. Regardless of the number of lifeguards on duty, having a sound lifeguard rotation plan and adhering to the proper procedures is crucial to the ability of the lifeguards to be effective with patron surveillance. During facility visits, inspectors should look to see that the rotation plan is in practice, that there is evidence of movement, alternation of tasks, and consistent zone coverage throughout the rotations. Owners and operators should be forthcoming with the documentation that supports the rotation plan, and again, a free and open dialogue should take place to discuss any questions or concerns that may arise. The final piece of the staff plan is subsection 63314, Supervision Protocols. When qualified lifeguards are used, the staffing plan shall include lifeguard supervision protocols to achieve the requirements of MAHC 633, meaning there must be a designated individual or qualified lifeguard supervisor who is responsible for the oversight of lifeguard performance and emergency response at an aquatic facility. A qualified lifeguard supervisor, by definition, is an individual who has successfully completed a lifeguard supervisor training course and holds an unexpired certificate for such training, and who has met the pre-service and continuing in-service requirements for that aquatic facility according to the MAHC. Statistically speaking, as evidenced by the more than 3,000 operational safety audits that my company conducts on an annual basis, poor lifeguard performance is generally a reflection of poor supervision. The need to establish accountability of staff behavior necessitates a supervisory component, and further, owners and operators need the ability to hold supervisors accountable for the overall performance of their staff. It is an unrealistic expectation to think that lifeguards will perform as we want them to without oversight and accountability. The challenge for inspection at this point with regard to qualified lifeguard supervision is founded on the definition itself, insomuch as the definition requires completion of an approved supervisor training course and an unexpired certificate of completion. The fact that this is a relatively new requirement is reflective of the fact that there are very few existing training courses that would meet the training course requirements as outlined in the code. And further, AHJs, for the most part, have not yet vetted these courses and offered approval. So until that time comes, inspection should include some dialogue surrounding the supervision plan and some education for the facility owner and operator with regard to the individual jurisdictional plan for achieving compliance moving forward. Quite a long laundry list of items that make up that first component of the safety plan for sure, but certainly all items of value that directly relate to the safety of swimmers who frequent aquatic facilities. Let's move on to the second component of the safety plan, subsection 6332, which is titled Emergency Action Plan. The Emergency Action Plan, or EAP as it is commonly referred to, includes the coordination of response and communication protocols and practices for the various types of an emergency that an aquatic facility might encounter, as well as guidelines for potential closure issues. Emergency action plans should be written, communicated and trained, and practiced on a regular basis. Facility EAPs should include identification of emergency types and imminent health hazards that can be reasonably anticipated, an outline of the methods of communication that will be used to summon additional responders both internally and externally, as well as those used to communicate important information to staff and patrons. Identification of anticipated response personnel from the safety team, the roles and specific tasks that each responder will perform as part of the response, and identification of the equipment needed to deal with the response. The EAP should comply with subsection 6345, Emergency Response and Communications Plans, which provides additional information regarding emergency response planning. This subsection requires the creation, maintenance, and annual updating of an operator procedure manual that includes information pertaining to the specifics of the EAP. The written plan shall be kept at the aquatic facility and be available for emergency personnel and/or the AHJ upon request. Documentation of employee training on the current plan shall be maintained on file and available upon request by the AHJ. The plan shall include, at a minimum, a diagram of the aquatic facility, a list of emergency telephone numbers, the location of the first aid kit and other rescue equipment, such as emergency oxygen, BVMs, AEDs, or backboards as needed, an appropriate emergency response plan for an accidental chemical release, and a fecal vomit blood contamination response plan as outlined in MAHC 651. In addition, a written facility evacuation plan shall be developed and maintained for the facility. A communication plan must exist to facilitate activation of internal emergency response and/or community 911 as necessary, and a contingency response plan for localized weather events that may affect their operation, such as lightning, hurricanes, tornadoes, or high winds. Inspectors should be familiar with the plan components as we have discussed, and should be willing to review and provide guidance as necessary to complete and/or improve the facility's EAP. It is important, I think, for inspectors to understand that this section relies heavily on an objective-driven philosophy, and that the technical committees worked extremely hard to make sure the code language was not overly prescriptive in nature. This effort continues today through the work of the CMAHC, who has identified some opportunities to allow for multiple means by which a facility can achieve the objectives for various entries. One such example of the objective nature of this section revolves around communication equipment. In the past, code language typically reflected the need for a hardwired direct dial phone capable of summoning emergency responders. In reality today, however, in many of our aquatic facilities, water parks for example, professional emergency response is in-house and can be summoned much more quickly and effectively by means of internal communication devices such as two-way radios, ultimately providing response times measured in seconds as opposed to several minutes or however long it would take for an ambulance to arrive. Additionally, many facilities have multiple entrance points for response for responding units to use in the event of an emergency, and it is important that a facility staff person be the one to summon a response in order to provide the complete and appropriate information to the responding unit, something that a guest might not be able to adequately do. In a nutshell, the owner and operator has the responsibility to create a plan that is most suited to the particular needs of their facility, and it is the inspector's responsibility to make sure they have done so without getting caught up in the specific detail. The third component of the safety plan is one we are all too familiar with, the dreaded Biohazard Action Plan. When dealing with biohazard issues, the Model Aquatic Health Code provides guidelines that help ensure an aquatic facility manages the entire response process from removal to disinfection of various parts of the facility, including both pool water and surface contamination, with the goal of being to provide for the safety of both patrons and staff members within the aquatic facility. The Biohazard Action Plan is detailed in Section 6.5 and consists primarily of 4 parts. The Contamination Response Plan. What are the big picture things that need to be accomplished here? The Water Contamination Response, which includes removal and data collection. The Pool Water Disinfection Plan, which includes treatment parameters and once again data collection. And the Surface Cleaning and Disinfection Plan, to make sure that all surfaces and equipment are disinfected properly. The 2016 release of the second edition of the MAHC saw some changes to the guidelines the CDC has long recommended for dealing with non-formed fecal releases in swimming pools. The changes are centered around the inactivation time for Cryptosporidium and stem from the results of the latest scientific studies that show Crypto's tolerance to the chemical sanitizers used in most public pools is greater than previously thought, especially in pools where stabilizers are used and at various temperatures. As a result, the requirements for closure and/or CT values have changed. As you know, it is important for inspectors to stay abreast of the latest research and any changes to the recommendations for dealing with such incidents. Inspections early on should involve ensuring that owners and operators are up to date on the latest guidelines. The diarrhea stool contamination response detail can be found in subsection 6532 of the code, and the detailed description of the data surrounding the new requirements can be found in the same subsection of the annex, for those of you who are craving more information on the subject as a good bedtime read for the kiddos. Component number 4 of the safety plan is subsection 6.3.3.3, pre-service training. Gone are the days of trial by fire for staff members working in an aquatic facility. No longer is on-the-job training a standard practice in the industry. Responsible facility management must now fully prepare staff members to be able to perform all aspects of the job they are assigned and to be fully prepared to respond appropriately to emergencies prior to their first shift through the completion and documentation of pre-service training. The guidelines from the MAHC require that all facilities have a pre-service training plan that includes policies and procedure training specific to that aquatic facility, demonstration of safety team skills specific to the aquatic facility and prior to active duty, as well as documentation of all training. There is a direct correlation between pre-service training and the success of the safety plan as a whole, as a thorough and quality pre-service training program ensures facility management has been proactive and taken the steps necessary to protect the interests of the swimming public by giving staff members the training and tools they need to be effective in completing the tasks they have assigned them. In consideration of these factors, the pre-service training requirements are rather extensive and include provisions for the following. Safety team EAP training. The staff must know and understand their roles and the roles of others in responding to an emergency. Safety team skills proficiency. Staff must be able to perform each task associated with their role in the EAP. Qualified lifeguard EAP training, specific to lifeguards who generally have first response and patient care roles within the EAP. Qualified lifeguard skills proficiency verification. Lifeguards must be able to demonstrate the ability to perform all emergency response tasks and to be able to execute them at the facility where they work. More often than not, lifeguards are certified at a facility that is not the same as where they work. It is imperative that they demonstrate the same skill competency at their facility that they demonstrated when they were certified. The best example of why this is so important relates to water depth. Many lifeguards are initially trained at a depth that is less than that of the facility they end up working at. As a result, they oftentimes cannot perform the deep water rescue skills at the deeper facility where they ultimately are assigned swimmer protection responsibilities. CPR and first aid training. Anyone with patient care responsibilities must have this confirmation of skills training prior to starting work. And of course, we must document all of our pre-service training. It isn't documented, it never happened. And finally, there should be aquatic supervisor training that takes place. We must make sure that those who are responsible for ensuring appropriate emergency response are adequately prepared for doing so. Subsection 63331 through 63336 provide significantly more detail to each of these areas and serve as a training plan outline of sorts for operators to follow. Inspectors should be equally familiar with these details and will look to verify documentation is present to reflect completion of the necessary training. The fifth and final component of the safety plan is subsection 6334, in-service training. Similar to pre-service training, a responsible risk reduction approach to aquatic facility management should include quality in-service training to ensure staff members are always ready to manage emergencies and execute the responsibilities of their job requirements, regardless of how long ago their initial training took place. The fact of the matter is, if we do not use or practice any skill set on a regular basis, our ability to recall properly the tasks and steps necessary to fulfill the objective significantly degrade over even a short period of time. So regular and frequent in-service training is essential to our ability to react and respond to emergencies. The content requirements for in-service training should include the following: an in-service training plan outlining content and frequency, maintenance of certificates and or renewal of credentials, competency demonstration in the real work environment, and documentation of in-service. Again, if it's not documented, it never happened. So every in-service training must be appropriately documented. Documentation should be completed by the person conducting the in-service training and should be maintained at the aquatic facility for a minimum of 3 years. It must be available for inspection. It should include the names of attendees, the training content, the date of the training, and the names of the trainer or trainers who conducted the in-service. As with pre-service training, inspectors should be familiar with these details and should look to verify documentation is present to reflect completion of the necessary training. I think our time here has just about come to an end today, and I hope that we were able to accomplish some of our objectives throughout the webinar. As I mentioned in the intro, I have had the good fortune to work with some very bright and talented individuals in the field of public health. Individuals whose singular goal was to work not as an adversary, but as a partner with me and my staff in the interest of providing the safest environment possible for the guests who visited my facility. It is my hope that each of you will develop your own partnerships with the aquatic facility owners and operators within your jurisdiction and that you too will be successful in developing strong working relationships, mutually respectful and mutually appreciative of the other's efforts. I hope that you have a little better understanding of some of the entries written into the MAHC, why they were written in the manner in which they were, and that you have a better feel for how to apply these entries when you visit the many aquatic facilities that you will during this upcoming swim season, so that you too are able to enhance the overall safety of the facilities that you visit through your efforts to educate. I would also encourage you, as Doug mentioned earlier, to, if you're not already a member of the CMAHC, take a few minutes to become one. The MAHC is a living, breathing document and undergoes a thorough review and update on a biannual basis. This review and all change requests are brokered through the CMAHC and its members. So by joining the group, you have the ability to participate in the review, to provide your suggestions for change, and to have a vote on the changes that are put forward. You can become a member and follow the process by visiting the CMAHC website at cmac.org. If I can be of any assistance with anything MAHC or CMAHC related moving forward, please do not hesitate to contact me directly. Thank you for attending today. Have a safe and happy swim season. And with that, I turn it back over to Jennifer.
Great. Thank you so much, Joe. And now I just wanted to extend my gratitude not only to Joe, but also to Doug. We will now move on to the question and answer portion of our webinar. Again, please submit any questions for any of the speakers you heard from today via the chat box on the right-hand side of your screen. We've got a team of folks that are ready to field questions. We've got our colleagues from CDC, Joe Lako and Maggie Byrne, and we also have Doug Sackett from CMAHC, and then of course Joe Stefanyack from Jeff Ellis Associates. So we've seen a couple of questions that have rolled in through the chat box, but feel free to keep entering those in. And so maybe we'll start with the first couple of ones that we received. Joe, while you were talking, their question came in around, I didn't understand the 30 feet from deck.
Sure. That's a pretty easy one. Basically, if the swimming pool is constructed in a manner that from any point on the deck, the distance to the center of the pool is 30 feet or more, then that would require the presence of a qualified lifeguard. As long as you can get to within 30 feet of the center of that pool from the deck, then you are not required, by that requirement anyways, to have a qualified lifeguard.
And this is Doug. Can you hear me, Jen?
Yes.
I just want to add a little bit to that too, and thanks, Joe. But again, without a trained lifeguard, you have patrons or not folks that don't necessarily have any swimming ability or swimming skills. So we don't want someone that's attempting a rescue to become a victim themselves, which happens all too often. So that's where the depth of, the 5 foot and the 30 foot. So as to make a non-swimming rescue, whether it be we talk about throwing the ring buoy out, but there's also reaching poles typically too. So it's to facilitate a reaching rescue without having to enter the water to protect the potential rescuer as well as and not become a victim.
Great, thanks, Doug. The other question, which I'm not sure we may have just touched on, so if a pool is wider than 30 feet or longer, is a lifeguard needed?
Again, that goes back to not necessarily if it's longer than 30 feet. So if it's 30 feet long but only 25 feet wide, then no, that does not meet the definition. So it would have to be 30 feet from any point on the deck.
Great, thanks, Joe. The next question we have is the pool management responsibility or the inspectors? I'm not sure. That was from Misty Joy. So Misty, if you're still on, if you could clarify your question, maybe we can come back to that one. Let's see. Can you tell us what the new CT is for cryptosporidium? Is it different than the 2010 fecal response CDC fact sheet?
Yes, I believe it is different, and I don't know. Maybe Doug, you can field that one. I don't know that information off the top of my head. I can pull it up here real quick though.
Okay, maybe we come back to that one.
Sure, I'll work on pulling that up.
Okay. The next question we have on deck is, this is for you, Joe. Wisconsin is considering the minimum age for a lifeguard to 15 instead of 16. What would be the recommendation of the minimum age?
Well, that's a tough question. So my company's particular stance on that is that we allow shallow water lifeguards at the age of 15. The bigger issue question, I suppose, is, it's all about the maturity level. In my career as an operator, I've had a number of younger folks who were terrific lifeguards because they had the maturity and the understanding of the importance of the role and were focused and able to do the things that we asked them to do. And I've had some older folks who weren't quite as focused or quite as able to stay on task as some of the younger folks. So, we've done it as a 15-year-old requirement for some of our shallow water stuff. We've gone to a 16-year-old for anything over 5 feet. And I think that the trend is to allow for the 15-year-olds because of the fact that we also in our instructor classes and our lifeguard classes should be evaluating some of that maturity and some of those other things. And as a supervisor, that's really the key. Are we able to make sure that those 15-year-olds can, number one, physically perform the skills, and number two, stay on task and stay focused and show the maturity that's necessary. So I don't really have a committed answer for you. I can tell you we allow for some 15-year-old lifeguards, and we always have, and we found that we have some very good ones.
Great. Thanks, Joe. Another question, will inspectors have to review the lifeguard rotation for adequate rotation?
Well, I think you want to look at the rotation plan as a whole, maybe not so much the physical process of the rotation, although we should be cognizant of the fact that, the lifeguards should be paying attention to the pool while those rotations take place. That is one of the requirements of the rotation plan. I think the bigger item for, the inspectors would be, make sure the guards are moving in a timely manner, to make sure that we're providing some alternation of task within the rotation plan so that we don't put a lifeguard on duty at 11 in the morning and they do scanning for 5 hours before they get a half an hour break, and then they scan for another 3 or 4 hours before the day is over. Those two parts of the rotation plan, I think, the alternation of task and the moving frequently are the two pieces that the inspectors should focus on. Obviously, if people aren't paying attention to the pool or there's uncovered zones of protection or zone of patron surveillance during the actual physical process of rotating, then that would be a red flag and something that we would want to have some discussions around. But the first two pieces are really what you can ascertain from the documentation of the rotation plan, as well as actually watching to make sure that it's taking place as it's supposed to.
And Joe, this is Doug. I just wanted to add a couple points on, from an inspector standpoint, looking at not only the plan but the actual implementation of rotation and eyes on the water. We've had a number of drownings, that have been investigated from a health department standpoint where they rotated, but not the proper, detailed procedures. So they weren't watching. Someone was not watching the water as they're changing stations, and so they had that lapse in actual watching surveillance of the water, which has been a number of drownings occur in that small period of time. So that's another critical component, I think, of the rotation. And Joe, I don't know if you want to add to that.
Well, it absolutely is, Doug, and we, in our particular program, we built in some practices that lifeguards need to follow. We want to make sure that, to really do it right, the incoming lifeguard should really verify that there's no one or nothing on the bottom or in trouble before they even assume responsibility for that change. When the change actually takes place, one of the two of them should have their eyes on the water and be scanning through the entire transition, and that may have to alternate back and forth as one person is climbing in and out of the stand, the other person should be watching, and then vice versa before that second person leaves. And then again, the person who's leaving really should be verifying that the zone was clear before they left. And that just, that does a couple of things. It provides some accountability for those lifeguards because when you do your incoming check, you're confirming that when I got here, everything was good. And then during the rotation process, we're ensuring that no one is paying, or no one is not looking at the water, that somebody's always looking at the water. And then before I leave, I'm going to confirm and say, yep, I checked it out and it was good when I left, just in case something were to happen. And it's kind of a CYA for the lifeguards as well as, the appropriate procedure to make sure that we're covering those things. There's a tendency to say, well, during the rotation period, it has to be clear on the bottom because, somebody else was watching it. But we've learned over the years that that's not always the case. And I did find the CT values information, if you want me to review that right now.
Sure, go for it.
Okay, so section 6523 talks about treated water at an aquatic venue, and if it's contaminated by the feces or the vomit, you want to make sure to check that the water's pH is 7.5 or lower, and that should be adjusted as necessary right away. Then we need to verify and maintain water temperature at 77 degrees Fahrenheit or 25 degrees Celsius or higher. The filtration and recirculation system while the pool needs to reach and maintain the proper free chlorination concentration during the remediation process. Again, we want to make sure that we're testing the chlorine residuals and that we're only using non-stabilized products when possible. To go to a little bit more detail there, when you do have a diarrheal stool incident, we have to check that the free chlorine residual is taken up to 20 milligrams per liter and maintained for at least 12.75 hours, so 12 3/4 hours, or an equivalent time and concentration to reach the CT inactivation value that 20 milligrams per liter and 12 3/4 hours would provide you. We need to make sure that we're circulating the water through any secondary disinfection systems that we might have as well. So 77 degrees is the tough part, and then the 20 milligrams per liter and 12.5, and that is for facilities that are not using stabilizers. If we are using stabilizers, then we want to lower that CYA concentration to less than 15 parts per million. We want to make sure then that we go to a chlorine residual of 20 milligrams per liter for at least 28 hours, or 30 milligrams per liter for at least 18 hours, or 40 milligrams per liter for at least 8.5 hours, or of course any equivalent time and concentration needed to reach that CT inactivation value. And that, I think, pretty much covers it. And again,
Great.
section 65321 covers that, and then the scientific study that was done with regards to why those changes were made is available in the annex of the code. So that same section 6532 of the annex will provide you with that scientific data behind the reasoning there for the changes.
Great. Thank you so much, Doug. So at this point, I'm just going to wrap things up and just say on behalf of NACCHO and CDC, I really like to thank Joe and Doug for joining us and sharing their experiences with the MAHC. Again, there was also a team of colleagues here that were responding to the Q&As, and I think you are also responding to each other's questions, so it's great to see that dialogue going on. Again, this webinar was recorded and will be distributed to all of those that were registered for this webinar. The recording will also be available on the NACCHO MAHC Network webpage along with other archived webinars. If you would like to receive information about our next webinar, be sure to register for the MAC network by sending your name and affiliation to macnet@nacho.org. Thank you again for joining us for our webinar today. That concludes our webinar.
Thank you, everybody.